Donald Trump's allies at the Kennedy Center are asking a federal court to let his name go back onto the building, but the financial records create a problem for their argument. Revenue deteriorated sharply after Trump took control, and the decline accelerated after his name was added. That matters because this fight is no longer just about a sign on a building. It is about whether political power can reshape a national cultural institution, suffer measurable consequences, and then use those consequences to justify even more control. The legal maneuver is unusually specific. After a federal judge ruled that the center itself could not simply be renamed for Trump without congressional authorization, the board adopted a different approach. Instead of calling the building the Trump Kennedy Center, it approved language recognizing Trump for restoring and renovating it, along with a proposal to rename the surrounding grounds President Donald J. Trump Plaza. The administration argues that this is acknowledgement, not renaming. Joyce Beatty, the Democratic congresswoman serving on the board, is asking the court to block it. That distinction is now at the center of the case. The Justice Department's position is that an inscription recognizing Trump's renovation efforts does not constitute the kind of memorial prohibited by the statute governing the Kennedy Center. The government also argues that the board has authority to name the surrounding grounds. That is a real legal argument, and the court will have to decide whether it works. Reuters reports that the administration is defending the new language precisely on the theory that acknowledging Trump's restoration work is different from renaming the Kennedy Center itself. But the filing goes considerably further than a technical argument about statutory language. The administration describes the Kennedy Center as facing severe structural and financial problems. It argues that Trump's involvement, fundraising ability, and renovation plans are critical to the institution's survival. And it warns that without those efforts, the building could eventually deteriorate to the point where it would have to be taken down, with an outdoor amphitheater mentioned as a possible replacement. Notice the sequence. First, Trump takes control of the institution and becomes chairman. His allies dominate the board. Then, his name is placed on the building. A judge later orders that name removed. Now the administration comes back with a narrower mechanism for putting Trump's name prominently on the institution, while arguing that Trump himself is essential to rescuing it. That would be politically controversial, even if the Kennedy Center were experiencing a dramatic financial recovery. But it isn't. Internal financial documents obtained by the Washington Post show that the Kennedy Center budgeted roughly $220 million in revenue for fiscal year 2026. By late May, officials projected only about $124 million. Even after substantial spending cuts, the institution was projecting a $23 million deficit. Earned revenue was projected to miss its target by 70%, while contributed revenue was projected to fall 25% short. That is the first major contradiction. The political argument says Trump is indispensable to the Kennedy Center's financial survival. The internal projections show an institution whose finances became dramatically worse during the period of his control. And the timing matters. Ticket sales had already weakened after Trump's takeover. According to the financial records, the deterioration became substantially more severe after the board voted in December to put Trump's name on the building. The Post describes a sharp fall in both ticket revenue and fundraising after that decision, leaving the center projected to miss its overall revenue target by nearly $100 million. That does not prove that every lost dollar was caused by Trump's name. Be careful with that distinction. Arts organizations face changing audiences, expensive programming, donor uncertainty, and long-term structural problems. Kennedy Center leadership argues that it inherited years of financial mismanagement from its predecessors. It also says Trump attracted new donors, helped secure major renovation funding, and that a proposed fiscal 2027 budget is balanced. Those claims deserve to be considered rather than dismissed. But that defense has to survive the chronology. The decline was not merely an accounting problem discovered after Trump arrived. Internal records show ticket buyers retreating after the takeover and an even steeper decline following the name change. Outside experts who reviewed the records told the Washington Post that the Kennedy Center's trajectory was dramatically different from the broader pattern among large cultural organizations. So the reasonable defense partially survives. Trump did inherit an institution with real challenges, and Congress did provide hundreds of millions of dollars for repairs. What does not survive nearly as well is the stronger claim that Trump's leadership has already demonstrated that he is the Kennedy Center's indispensable financial rescuer. The numbers simply do not establish that. And this is where the dispute becomes much bigger than architecture. Ask yourself what standard you would apply if the parties were reversed. If a Democratic president took control of a National Memorials Board, became its chairman, put his own name on the building, lost a court fight over that name, and then returned with a slightly different inscription honoring himself. Would calling it an acknowledgement settle the question? That is the institutional test here. The government says the proposed inscription is fundamentally different from renaming the building. Beatty says it is an attempt to accomplish indirectly what the court already prevented directly. Neither characterization becomes true merely because one side says it. The exact statutory language, the board's authority, and the previous court order are what matter. And there is another piece of evidence that makes the financial argument harder to ignore. The National Symphony Orchestra, which operates through the Kennedy Center, has also been experiencing severe financial pressure. Internal documents reported earlier this month showed falling donations and ticket revenue, with the Kennedy Center forced to absorb millions in additional losses. The orchestra's fundraising difficulties intensified after the center drastically reduced its development staff, cutting a department that had relied heavily on long-standing donor relationships. That matters because organizations like this do not survive on symbolism. They survive on audiences, programming, artists, donors, institutional knowledge, and public trust. You can renovate marble. Rebuilding relationships is harder. And this is exactly where political messaging can fool reasonable people. If you hear only that the Kennedy Center was already troubled and that Trump secured enormous renovation funding, Trump rescued it sounds plausible. If you hear only the collapsing revenue numbers, the opposite conclusion can sound automatic. The discipline is comparing the claim against the full chronology before repeating it. That is what Don't Get Played is built to help you do. The digital ebook is $9, one time. Use the first link in the description or pinned comment, because the next piece of the chronology is probably the most revealing. The administration's legal filing does not simply argue that Trump deserves recognition because renovations are happening. It links that recognition to future financial support. The board's position is that prominent acknowledgement of Trump is important because donors could otherwise withhold money, worsening the center's financial position. In other words, Trump's name is being presented not merely as a reward for restoration, but as part of the mechanism needed to finance the institution's future. Now compare that claim with what happened when his name was previously attached to the building. Ticket sales and fundraising did not surge. They fell. And according to the internal projections, they fell dramatically. That does not tell us what every individual donor thought. It does not prove motive. It does not establish that removing Trump's name tomorrow would suddenly repair the institution's finances. But it does create a burden of proof. If you are arguing in federal court that recognition of one political figure is financially indispensable, while your own institution's revenue deteriorated during that political figure's takeover and fell even harder after his name was attached to the institution, you need compelling evidence explaining why the future will be different. That evidence has not yet resolved the contradiction. The renovation question deserves separate treatment, because there is another danger here: confusing opposition to Trump's name with opposition to repairing the building. Those are not the same question. A National Performing Arts Center can need extensive repairs without requiring a sitting president's name on its facade. Congress can fund structural work without turning the project into a personal memorial. And the board can make legitimate decisions about closures, construction, and modernization without those decisions automatically establishing that one political leader deserves permanent recognition. The government argues that these issues are connected because Trump's stature and fundraising ability are part of what makes the restoration possible. That is the claim the evidence must support. Congress already approved roughly $257 million for repairs. The Kennedy Center says a full 2-year closure would produce better financial results than trying to renovate sections of the building while continuing operations. According to the center, the full renovation plan could ultimately produce a modest surplus, whereas rolling closures could generate much larger losses. That is probably the strongest substantive case for the administration. A major building can require disruptive repairs. Closing completely can sometimes be cheaper than performing construction around continuing operations. And acknowledging someone associated with raising private money is common in American cultural institutions. So, if the dispute were only about whether the Kennedy Center needs repairs, the administration would have a considerably easier argument. But that is not the entire dispute. The disputed inscription names the sitting president personally. The proposed plaza names the grounds after him personally. And those proposals follow an unsuccessful effort to place his name directly on the Kennedy Center. Intent is difficult to prove. Sequence is not. First came the takeover, then the name change, then the court challenge, then the removal, then a new proposal to place Trump's name back on the facade under different wording. That chronology is why the legal distinction between renaming and acknowledgement matters so much. And it gives you a useful standard to apply, which should carry more weight when judging this decision: the label officials give it or the practical result the decision produces. Because practically, visitors approaching the Kennedy Center would again encounter Donald Trump's name, prominently displayed on the building. The court will decide whether that is legally permissible. Political accountability requires a different judgment: whether the institution is being administered primarily to fulfill its public mission, or increasingly being used to create personal recognition for the president controlling its board. The financial record cannot answer that question by itself, but it can test the justification being offered. And right now, that record is deeply uncomfortable for the rescue narrative. The center's leadership says the institution faced problems before Trump. That is supported to some extent. The National Symphony Orchestra, for example, had long-standing capitalization and fundraising challenges. But the Kennedy Center's fiscal 2026 projections show something more severe than simply inheriting an imperfect balance sheet. They show an institution forecasting roughly $124 million in revenue against a budget of approximately $220 million, and projecting a $23 million deficit despite major expense reductions. And the broader cultural sector provides another useful comparison. Preliminary industry data cited by the Washington Post indicated that large cultural organizations generally remained financially stable during the comparable period, often ending with modest surpluses despite pressures on ticket sales and philanthropy. Experts reviewing the Kennedy Center figures described its trajectory as an outlier. That weakens another possible explanation: that everybody in the arts experienced essentially the same collapse. They didn't. Something unusually severe happened here. Exactly how much of it resulted from political backlash, management decisions, programming changes, staff reductions, the name controversy, or pre-existing weaknesses cannot yet be reduced to one clean percentage. That uncertainty matters. It would be irresponsible to say Trump personally caused every dollar of the Kennedy Center's losses. But it would be equally irresponsible to describe his takeover as an established financial rescue while ignoring internal projections showing the institution deteriorating under that leadership. That is what the evidence establishes. Trump and his allies took control of the Kennedy Center and pursued unprecedented personal recognition for the sitting president. A federal court blocked the earlier renaming effort. The board then approved new language recognizing Trump's renovation work and proposed naming the surrounding grounds for him. The administration is defending those actions while arguing that Trump's leadership and fundraising are essential to the institution's survival. At the same time, internal financial documents show steep declines in revenue, fundraising, and ticket sales, with the deterioration becoming particularly severe after Trump's name was added. What remains unresolved is the legal question surrounding the new inscription and plaza, the ultimate financial outcome of the renovation strategy, and precisely how much of the institution's financial decline can be attributed to each individual management or political decision. But responsibility for the governing choices is much clearer. Trump became chairman. His allies controlled the board. That leadership chose the naming strategy. That leadership chose the renovation strategy. And that leadership is now asking the courts to accept a distinction that would allow Trump's name to return prominently to an institution Congress created as a memorial to John F. Kennedy. The central contradiction is therefore still sitting right where we started. The administration wants the public and the court to view Trump as indispensable to saving the Kennedy Center. The financial record, so far, shows an institution whose condition became substantially more precarious during his control. Maybe the renovation eventually succeeds. Maybe new fundraising changes the picture. Maybe the court decides the proposed inscription is legally distinct from renaming the institution. Those possibilities should remain possibilities until evidence turns them into facts. Because another political filing, statistic, accusation, or viral clip will arrive soon, asking you to reach a conclusion before you have the complete record. Don't Get Played is a digital method for becoming harder to manipulate and better able to defend your political convictions with evidence. It costs $9 once. The first link is in the description or pinned comment. Political reaction is immediate. A defensible conclusion has to be earned.